what she called the beyond. He came home 6 weeks after Adam was born. His right leg was off at the knee. He stumped in on one crude wooden leg he himself had carved out of beech wood, and already it was splitting. He had in his pocket and placed on the parlor table the lead bullet they had given him to bite while they cut off his frayed leg. Adam's father, Cyrus, was something of a devil, had always been wild, drove a two-wheeled cart too fast, and managed to make his wooden leg seem jaunty and desirable. He had enjoyed his military career, what there was of it. Being wild by nature, he had liked his brief period of training, and the drinking, and the gambling and whoring that went with it. Then he marched south with a group of replacements, and he enjoyed that too. Seeing the country and stealing chickens and chasing rebel girls up the haystacks. The gray, despairing weariness of protracted maneuvers and combat did not touch him. The first time he saw the enemy was at 8 o'clock one spring morning, and at 8:30 he was hit in the right leg by a heavy slug that mashed and splintered the bones beyond repair. Even then he was lucky, for the rebels retreated, and the field surgeons moved up immediately. Cyrus Trask did have his 5 minutes of horror, while they cut the shreds away, and sawed the bone off the square, and burned the open flesh. The tooth marks in the bullet proved that, and there was considerable pain, while the wound healed under the unusually septic conditions in the hospital of that day. But Cyrus had vitality and swagger. While he was carving his beechwood leg and hobbling about on a crutch, he contracted a particularly virulent dose of the clap from a Negro girl who had whistled at him from under a pile of lumber and charged him 10 cents. When he had his new leg and painfully knew his condition, he hobbled about for days, looking for the girl. He told his bunkmates that he was going to do what he was going to do when he found her. He planned to cut off her ears and her nose with his pocket knife and get his money back. Carving on his wooden leg, he showed his friends how he would cut her. "When I finish her, she'll be a funny-looking bitch," he said. "I'll make her so drunk, Indian won't take out after her." His light of love must have sensed his intentions, for he never found her. By the time Cyrus was released from the hospital and the army, the gonorrhea had dried up. When he got home to Connecticut, there remained only enough of it for his wife. Mrs. Trask was a pale, inside-herself woman. No heat of the sun ever reddened her cheeks, and no open laughter raised the corners of her mouth. She used religion as a therapy for the ills of the world and of herself, and she changed the religion to fit the ill. When she found that the theosophy she had developed for communication with that of a dead husband was not necessary, she cast about for some new unhappiness. Her search was quickly rewarded by the infection Cyrus brought home from the war, and as soon as she was aware that a condition existed, she devised a new theology. Her god of communication became a god of vengeance. To her, the most satisfactory deity she had devised so far, and, as it turned out, the last. It was quite easy for her to attribute her condition to certain dreams that she had experienced while her husband was away, but the disease was not punishment enough for her nocturnal philandering. Her new god was an expert in punishment. He demanded of her a sacrifice. She searched her mind for some proper egotistical humility and almost happily arrived at the sacrifice herself. It took her 2 weeks to write her last letter with revisions and corrected spelling. In it, she confessed to crimes she could not possibly have committed and admitted faults far beyond her capacity, and then, dressed in a secretly made shroud, she went out on a moonlight night and drowned herself in a pond so shallow that she had to get down on her knees in the mud and hold her head underwater. This required great willpower. As the warm unconsciousness finally crept over her, she was thinking. She was thinking with some irritation of was drunk for 2 days and a half. Whatever may have happened in his developing brain, it proved beneficial to his metabolism. From that 2.5 days, he gained in iron health. And when at the end of the 3 days, his father finally went out and bought a goat, Adam drank the milk greedily, vomited, drank more, and was on his way. His father did not find the reaction alarming, since he was doing the same thing. Within a month, Cyrus Trask's choice fell on the 17-year-old daughter of a neighboring farmer. The courtship was quick and realistic. There was no doubt in anyone's mind about his intentions. They were honorable and reasonable. Her father abetted the courtship. He had 2 younger daughters, and Alice, the eldest, was 17. This was her first proposal. Cyrus wanted a woman to take care of Adam. He needed someone to keep the house and cook, and a servant cost money. He was a vigorous man and needed the body of a woman, and that too cost money, unless you were married to it. Within 2 weeks, Cyrus had wooed, wedded, bedded, and impregnated her. His neighbors did not find his action hasty. It was quite normal in that day for a man to use up 3 or 4 wives in a normal lifetime. Alice Trask had a number of admirable qualities. She was a deep scrubber and a corner cleaner in the house. She was not very pretty, so there was no need to watch her. Her eyes were pale, her complexion sallow, and her teeth crooked, and she was extremely healthy and never complained during her pregnancy. Whether she liked the children or not, no one ever knew. She was not asked, and she never said anything unless she was asked. From Cyrus's point of view, this was possibly the greatest of her virtues. She never offered her opinion or statement, and when a man was talking, she gave a vague impression of listening while she went about doing the housework. The youth, inexperience, and taciturnity of Alice Trask all turned out to be the assets for Cyrus. While he continued to operate his farm, as such farms were operated in the neighborhood, he entered on a new career, that of the old soldier, and that energy which had made his wild now made thoughtful. That energy which had made him wild now made him thoughtful. No one now outside of the War Department knew the quality and duration of his service. His wooden leg was at once a certificate of proof of his soldiering and a guarantee that he wouldn't ever have to do it again. Timidly, he began to tell Alice about his campaigns, but as his technique grew, so did his battles. At the very first, he knew he was lying, but it was not long before he was equally sure that every one of his stories was true. Before he had entered the service, he had not been much interested in warfare. Now he bought every book about war, read every report, subscribed to the New York papers, studied maps. His knowledge of geography had been shaky, and his information about the fighting non-existent. Now he had become an authority. He knew not only the battles, movements, and campaigns, but also the units involved down to the regiments, their colonels, and where they originated, and from the telling he became convinced that he had been there. All of this was a gradual development, and it took place while Adam was growing into boyhood and his young half-brother behind him. Adam and little Charles would sit silent and respectful while their father explained how every general thought and planned, and where they had made their mistakes and what they should have done. And then he had known in it at the time. He had told Grant and McClellan where they were wrong and had begged them to take his analysis of the situation. Invariably, they refused his advice, and only afterward was he proved right. There was one thing Cyrus did not do, and perhaps it was clever of him. He never once promoted himself to non-commissioned rank. Private Trask he began, and Private Trask he remained. In the total telling, it made him at once the most mobile and ambiguous private in the history of warfare. It made it necessary for him to be in as many as 4 places at once, but perhaps instinctively he did not tell those stories close to each other. Alice and the boys had